What does JFK mean to the American people, including Generation X and the millennial generation? Coming up next on Get Right with Lenny McAllister, starting right
now. Get Right with Lenny McAllister.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The way we help bring back America and we build the bridges and bring people together is by making sure we hold everybody accountable in a 360 fashion.
So let me close with this. Yes, there is a change that we can believe in, but it will never come from a politician or a government program.
We cannot find physical standards here in the land of Lincoln from Carbondale to Elgin that we can collectively continue to tolerate anything we found on the streets of South Chicago and East St. Louis.
We got to move away from the American Idol soundbite nature of politics and back to the American statesman of humble servant leadership that we used to see in politics.
It is time to roll out the era of the new, educated, engaged, and energized American citizen.
I go do the jail ministry. I speak to the kids in the streets. So I'm never going to lay down being a conservative just as much as I'll never lay down being a proud African American.
Feel like a black republic, money I got coming in. Can't turn my back on the hood, I got love for them.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Get Right with Lenny McAllister. You know the drill. You know how we do this. Very simple. You want to find me on Twitter. It's very simple. LennyMcAllister is where you can give the feedback there. On Facebook, very simple. tinyurl.com/LENNYPA for the PA native GE. We know what November 22nd, 2013 is. It is the 50-year anniversary. We're going to start coming up on these very, very sad, very, very tragic anniversaries. We had earlier the anniversary of the March on Washington, the anniversary of the March in Detroit, the anniversary of the desegregation of Greensboro, North Carolina. We had in 1962 the 50-year anniversary of the desegregation of the University of Mississippi. 50 years, we had the Game of Change with Mississippi State University and Loyola University, and the NCAA tournament game where Mississippi State University, their players had to sneak out of the state of Mississippi, sneak out of the state to avoid a court order prohibiting them from playing in a game, a tournament game, an NCAA tournament game. Imagine this. This is the precursor to March Madness. Playing in a game where I believe they were undefeated at the time too. That the court order basically prohibited them, from playing against an integrated team, believe it or not. So we're coming across all of these 50-year anniversaries that a lot of them are things to celebrate. The March on Washington, obviously. You know, the tearing down of certain walls of segregation and Jim Crow, obviously. But here we sit, and we're going to also start commemorating some very, very tragic times, one of which is the last United States president to be assassinated, John F. Kennedy. And what does that mean to us moving forward for the next 50 years? What does that mean for us now, 50 years after the fact? You know, what kind of imprint did it have on our national psyche? And you hear a lot of people talking about that, and of course I want your feedback on what you think about it as well. But, you know, when you look at this, and I may bring this up on National Public Radio. I'll be on the barbershop a little later on today, and I'm pretty certain that we'll be talking about JFK and the ramifications of the assassination. But one of the things that I'm willing to bring this up there, and I bring it up now, I think it's the first time, particularly in the 20th century, and it really hasn't gone anywhere over the last 50 years. I believe that was the first time where the American people really stopped trusting the federal government. Because although the country came together and mourned the loss of Kennedy, it was around his assassination where people first started really believing that the government's really keeping something from us. Now, of course, I mean, we can go back throughout history, and there were plenty of things that the federal government kept from us over the years. plenty of things that presidents and Secretary of States and Congress and different types of alliances, if you will, strange bedfellows, as they often say about politics, if you will, all came together one way or another to give partial truths, bits of the story, or flat out lies. I mean, anybody that knows the history of FDR and getting into World War II understands that he was telling the American people one thing and he was doing something different. Now, the Axis powers knew exactly what FDR was doing, which is why they didn't feel so bad as far as taking Pearl Harbor out. But that was the thing that tipped the scales and got us into the war and changed the isolationist mood that had taken over America at that point in time. People forget that we saw it as Europe's war at that point in time. We didn't see it as a world war. It didn't become a world war truly until the Americans jumped into it in December of 1941. But that came about because we were doing a lot of things that we told the American people that we weren't doing, and that was led by FDR. You go back to Lincoln. There were plenty of things that Lincoln did when it came to, quote-unquote, preserving the Union, which the Civil War eventually did, and it got rid of slavery. Obviously, we know the story about that as well. But all that to say this, there were things that one hand didn't know that the other hand was doing. There were things that skirted the lines of constitutionality. There were things that Honest Abe wasn't quite honest about. And you see this throughout American history. But the level of skepticism towards the American government never really hit the levels that we're facing today until you had the assassination of President Kennedy, until you had the end of Camelot, if you will. And I think that if there's anything else that we need to talk about, it's how do we recapture that over the next 50 years? I mean, think about it. Number one, I mean, you talk about the skepticism. They're telling stories now where you still can't even see the First Lady's pink dress for another, 50 years I think it is? Maybe a little longer than that. I think it's 50 years. No, it's 2103. So, my bad, another 90 years where you can't see the blood-stained dress. No, not that I'm saying that I want to go to the Smithsonian and be able to stare at it tomorrow, take some pictures, and, pose beside it. I think, there are some people that will do that, and it's kind of gross to me. I mean, to some people, to them, it's history. And I get that, too. To me, it's like, I don't need to see all that. But let's think about that. You can't see something like this for another 90 years. It has to be 140 some odd years out. I mean, you look at the stuff about Lincoln and Lincoln's assassins and, grave digging that they used to do back then. I mean, a lot of those things were made available to the American public a lot sooner than 140 years. And that bakes in the skepticism that people have about the American government. And then Lord knows, we can get into the conspiracy theories abound. There's a Bruder tape, Grassy Knoll, JFK, Oliver Stone, Garrison down in New Orleans, and everything else from Cuba to the Soviet Union to the mafia and points in between. People generally said to themselves, something is not quite right. I don't know what it is. But I don't trust what I'm being told. I don't trust the Warren Commission. I don't trust Johnson. And if people don't think that the skepticism of Johnson post-1964 going into the Vietnam War didn't have something to do with November 1963, they are skirting history. They are not being true to themselves. They're not being true to the facts. They're not really embracing what the mood was. Yes, people wanted Johnson over Goldwater, and Johnson blew Goldwater out. But once the war continued to mushroom and balloon, and we were told we're coming out, but they actually see the troops ramping up, the numbers ramping up. We're told we're winning when all the visual evidence and the television coverage shows that it's a stalemate at best, and that we are suffering some heavy losses, and that the reasons to protest may be valid at home. Maybe not the violence, maybe not the hatred towards the soldiers, which is always that's always abhorrent. You can't hate the soldiers for what the commander-in-chief and the generals are telling them to do. You have some conscientious objectors. You had people going to Canada. You had people going to jail. But you can't hate on an 18-year-old from farmland, Iowa, that's trying to serve his country and believes in his commanders and believes in the commander-in-chief. But it does go to this, though. So respect and love for the soldiers all the time. All the time. But it does go to this. You look at that assassination in 1963. You look at the general level of mistrust that came about afterwards, particularly after the 64 presidential election. You think about the Warren Commission. You think about the conspiracy theories afterwards. You think about, heck, let's just go 2 days later. Let's look at how Jack Ruby took out Lee Harvey Oswald. How he was able to basically get in there and shoot him. How he had connections to the mafia. How he was a shady guy. How he had basically nothing to say. I mean, you had one guy that was chirping like a songbird. Next guy, quiet as a church mouse. Goes to jail and dies of cancer. These are things that got baked into American society as a result of this assassination. And by the way, if you think that this assassination only reverberated through the 60s, I know there are plenty of stories. What if JFK would have lived? What would Vietnam have been like? What would the civil rights movement have been like? There are people that argue that the civil rights movement would not have continued its momentum because people did it as a memorial to the slain president. They said that it caught momentum because now goodwill was there in order to pass this legislation in 1964. There's an argument for that. I'm sure we'll hear more of that as we hit that 50-year anniversary next year. But there's also something to be said about the lasting impact that the lack of trust that stemmed all the way back to November in Dallas and the impact that it had and permeated throughout the next 50 years of American politics. I mean, heck, I won't even get into Obamacare now because that's unfair. What I will say about Obamacare now with this is it's a lot easier for people to look at a president that they used to trust and turn around and say you're a liar or I don't trust you anymore and do it as fast as they're doing it even today because of 1963. And we have to remember the conspiracy theories, the Warren Commission, and everything else came out after 63, and then we had Watergate, which so basically you opened up Pandora's box in 1963. With all the skepticism around the assassination. I remember a story when I was growing up of a guy that was in the military. He said that, usually when there was any type of threat to the president or any threat to the homeland, the security forces and the military around the world, they heightened their activities. They heightened their exercises. And to this individual, when he saw that Kennedy was slain and that nothing changed, nothing in the urgency changed overseas, and this individual at the time, I believe, was in Eastern Germany or in Germany. At the time it was actually West Germany. Couldn't have been in East Germany. That was controlled by the Soviet Union. But if you're basically on the front lines of the Cold War and exercises and alerts don't elevate when the president's assassinated, to this individual, they basically said that was enough proof to me that it was an inside job. There were people that said, hey, newspapers came out overseas that said that Kennedy was assassinated before Kennedy was actually assassinated. I mean, you've heard all the conspiracy theories. All of this stuff was going on. And now think about this. This is going on for roughly 10 years. And then you get Watergate. Now, I'm not saying that the level of skepticism during the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination was quite the same as the disgust that people had with Richard M. Nixon when he resigned from the presidency. What I am saying to you, though, is this. If there was ever a factor that broke the ice, that allowed the American people to look at their government and not revere it in the same way. Look at their government and say, these are flawed people too. And they can be wrong also. And they can make mistakes. And they can be treacherous as well. Not everybody in government is altruistic. Yeah, we had our McCarthyisms moment, if you will. We had our, Dred Scott moments. We had the Civil War. We had our moments in the Jim Crow South. I mean, I get that. But generally speaking, there was still a belief in America that you can obtain something that was higher than all of us. This level of esteem for country. I mean, let's be honest. The civil rights movement cannot succeed through the legal process, cannot succeed through the courts, and challenge court law if there was not a belief behind it that said that at some point in time, if I take this legal argument and apply it against the Constitution, you either got to throw away the Constitution or you have to throw away this Jim Crow law that exists in this area, that exists in this city, that exists in this state or in this region, or, dare I say, throughout America by way of the 10th Amendment. Which is why, by the way, people that protest the 10th Amendment, it's not that they don't like the amendment. It's that African Americans and minorities, they have seen way too many times how the 10th Amendment has been used to discriminate. And those can also say that you can use it for other things in today's times. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole today. And again, love your feedback. You know where to find me on Twitter, know where to find me on Facebook. The Kennedy assassination, however, like I said, created the pathway for people to stop trusting their government, to be objective and say, yes, they're capable of doing this. Now, again, African Americans knew about the Tuskegee Project. They knew that the government was giving black men syphilis. They knew about Jim Crow. They knew about legalized discrimination. Women knew that, hey, this government that says that everybody's equal really, really, really means only all men are created equal. And they only really mean that all white men are created equal. So there are certain groups within the United States that got it. But there was still a prevailing viewpoint that you can appeal to the greater good in America if you take the particular belief that if I try hard enough and I dig through the surface enough, I can get through the crap and I can still get to that gold that is the American dream, that is American liberty, that is the magic and the prestige of the American Constitution, that is the esteem of doing things the right way because we honor our predecessors in American government, and therefore we're going to do things a particular way. We're going to hold that esteem high, even if it makes us uncomfortable. The Kennedy assassination and moving forward for the next 50 years, there were points of time that started in Dallas that chipped away at that belief. Look at how we reacted to the government when it came to the Vietnam War. Look at how America reacted to things such as nonviolence and the belief that you can change the laws without violent protest. 1963, people were walking down streets singing "We Shall Overcome," peacefully assembling in Washington, D.C. By 1968, you have riots. You have riots at the Democratic Convention. You have riots in the streets after the assassinations of King and Robert F. Kennedy. You have buildings burning down. You have people believing that appeal to the American esteem of doing what's right as a government, as a way of legislating and living together, just simply does not work anymore. By the time you get to Nixon in 74, people have already gone through 10 years of saying to themselves, I didn't believe them about Kennedy. I see that I didn't need to believe Johnson about Vietnam. We still don't know what happened in Dallas. Maybe somebody paid Sirhan. Maybe he was programmed by the government. You started having your own conspiracy theories there. You had just conspiracy theories about Martin Luther King. You started hearing the stories in whisper campaigns about the FBI doing surveillance on King and Malcolm X. Fred Hampton was, by that point in time, taken out by the Chicago police. I mean, you had all these things going on. Then Nixon resigns. So you got all these things that started in Dallas with the lack of belief, the skepticism. 10 years of that, more events build up to Watergate. By that point in time, people had said to themselves, and I'll say this as I wrap up, people had said to themselves, I don't trust this government. I don't know if I like this government. And I'm going to start walking away from this government. Now, I would have to look at the numbers, but I would not be surprised if the voter participation rates after Kennedy didn't start dipping down. And by the time you got to Watergate, really started dipping down. I wouldn't be surprised that, by the time you got to the 80s and people didn't believe Reagan, and by the time we got to George H.W. Bush talking about read my lips, and you got to Bill Clinton saying, I did not have sex with that woman, and you got to George W. Bush in the way he won the 2000 election and the Iraqi war, and now you're at President Obama with Obamacare or some of the other things that have come up with this president. It's not as hard for people to believe that their president would lie. It's not as hard for people in general in America to not trust the government, not believe in the government, not invest emotionally in the civics of their communities and the communities around them, or believe in the federal government, or try to not only follow leaders and believe in them, but lead by example. All of these things, to me, really got the seed of skepticism from Dallas, November 1963. Sad. I mean, there's so many things that live on as the legacy of John F. Kennedy, but to me, that one aspect of not trusting government and losing the hope of what the American government's supposed to be for us, by the people, for the people, I think it died that day as well. What do you think? I really want your feedback on this as we go into the weekend. You know where to find me on Twitter, LENNYMCALLISTER. Facebook, you know where to find me. Have a great weekend. Say your prayers for America. Reflect on 50 years since the assassination. And let's come back Monday and figure out what we can do to make the world a better place for us all. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon. TCNGB, take care and God bless. Peace.